I was 25, sitting in the sleek glass lobby of one of the most prestigious firms in the city, my hands tightly folded in my lap, trying to steady the pounding rhythm of my heart. This wasn't just any interview. It was the interview, the opportunity one had dreamed about for years, the one I had sacrificed sleep and countless hours to prepare for, the one that could give me the financial stability I had been desperately seeking for my kids. I glanced down at my worn shoes, polished to the best of my ability, and smoothed out the sleeves of my plain blouse. I wasn't wearing the flashy designer suit that my younger sister, Lindsay, always seemed to effortlessly pull off. But I had something she didn't: experience, drive, and a burning desire to prove myself. When the recruiter, a tall man in his 40s with sharp glasses and an authoritative tone, finally stepped out of the room, I stood up and shook his hand. He smiled politely, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Carter, thank you for coming in," he said. I exhaled slowly, forcing a smile that felt more like a mask than a gesture of gratitude. "Thank you for the opportunity," I replied, trying to sound calm, though my insides were anything but. As we walked back into the interview room, his phone buzzed sharply on the table. He glanced at it quickly, and for the briefest moment, his expression shifted, the calm professionalism faltering, before he caught himself. He didn't say anything, but I could tell something was off. I pushed my nerves aside and began answering his questions, speaking steadily and passionately about my past work, my ideas, my ambitions. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was standing tall, like I wasn't invisible. But then came the question that sent a chill through me: "Do you get along with your family?" I blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" I said, trying to process the unexpectedness of the question. He cleared his throat. "It's just odd timing. I received a message right before we started, nothing to worry about." But I saw the hesitation in his eyes, the flicker of doubt that passed over his face, and for a moment, everything felt off balance. I could feel my stomach tightening into a knot, but I pushed forward, finishing the interview with as much grace and dignity as I could muster. When it was over, I left the building with my head held high, my heart still racing. As soon as I stepped outside into the cold air, I pulled out my phone. There, waiting for me in the family group chat, were the messages I would never forget. "Mom just texted the recruiter," one read. "Told him not to hire that worthless trash. He deserves to know the truth." My hands shook as I read the next message. "Dad. Ha. Good. Tell him to give it to Lindsay instead. At least she looks the part." Then Lindsay chimed in, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone into the street. I had been sabotaged. My own family had destroyed my chances, and they wanted me to see it. They wanted me to know how little they thought of me. I stood frozen for a moment, the words from the text messages cutting deeper than anything I had ever felt. My mind raced as I processed the betrayal. Not only had they sabotaged my chance, but they had done it in such a deliberate, malicious way, forcing me to see their cruelty. But it wasn't over. My gaze shifted to the figure walking out of the building, Lindsay, my younger sister. She sauntered toward me, her steps confident, her smile wide and smug. Her designer heels clicked sharply on the pavement, the same heels I could never afford. "Guess who just nailed your interview?" she called out, twirling her hair and waving an envelope in the air. My stomach twisted. "You didn't?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Yep, recruiter said you weren't professional enough," Lindsay purred, a smug smirk spreading across her face. "But lucky for me, I was right there to show him how it's done." She tapped the envelope against my chest, as if she were handing me my defeat on a silver platter. "Looks like they chose the better sister." My heart sank. They had orchestrated this. My parents had handed her my future like it was some kind of prize, and now Lindsay was gloating in front of me. I felt a sharp, bitter humiliation rising in my chest as she turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the cold, broken. I walked home in a haze, each step heavier than the last, my mind replaying what had just happened. How had I let this happen? How had I, a 25-year-old woman who had worked so hard to build something for herself, ended up here, humiliated, betrayed, and broken? The weight of it all pressed on me like a vice, squeezing the breath out of my lungs. When I got home, I didn't even bother to pretend I was okay. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and slumped into the chair, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Hannah and Michael, my 2 kids, were playing quietly in the corner of the room, unaware of the storm raging inside me. How could I face them like this? How could I explain that everything I had worked for, everything I had promised them, had just been ripped away? I closed my eyes and tried to take deep breaths, but all I could see was Lindsay's smug face, her perfect hair, and her confident stride as she handed the recruiter her future on a silver platter. "The better sister," she had said. The words stung like a slap in the face. How many times had I been told I wasn't good enough? That I wasn't the one who would succeed, that I would always be second best? It was like my parents were so blind to my worth that they couldn't see how much I had sacrificed, how hard I had worked to get where I was. I had been raised in a family that valued appearance over substance, success over integrity. Lindsay had always been their golden child. She had the looks, the charm, the ability to make people like her. I had always been the quieter one, the one who stayed in the background, too focused on work and family to play the game of appearances. But that had never bothered me, until now. How could they do this to me? The questions kept coming, echoing in my mind. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I held it in. I had learned long ago that anger only made things worse. It only made people see you as unstable, as weak. So I stayed silent, and I stewed in my thoughts. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions, getting the kids ready for school, making dinner, handling the laundry, but inside, I was falling apart. Each day that passed felt like a countdown, a ticking clock that reminded me of how much I had lost. But what hurt most wasn't the job I lost. It wasn't the fact that Lindsay had taken my place. It was the realization that my parents didn't care enough to even consider me as worthy of the opportunity. They had been so quick to hand it to her, to choose her over me. But I was done crying. I wasn't going to be the person who sat back and let this define me. I had spent my whole life letting people walk all over me, letting people choose Lindsay over me. No more. If they thought I was weak, they had another thing coming. It was time to stop being the victim and take control. I started with small things. I didn't tell anyone, not even my best friend, Sarah, what I was doing. But I began to gather information. I went to the library, pored over books about the company Lindsay worked for, the one I had just been denied a job at. I learned about their values, integrity, teamwork, innovation, and I knew right away that Lindsay, with her superficial charm, didn't fit into their culture. She wasn't qualified. She didn't have the work ethic. I wasn't about to let her get away with it. I started to listen, to observe. Every time I saw Lindsay, I listened to her brag about her achievements, about skipping meetings, about passing off other people's work as her own. I made mental notes of her habits, her flaws, the cracks in her perfect image. She didn't even realize I was watching. I didn't need to take screenshots or make recordings. I didn't need proof on a screen. I knew the truth, and when the time came, I would make sure everyone else knew it, too. Then came the day I had been waiting for. Lindsay's company was hosting a big presentation, a chance for employees to showcase their work in front of clients, coworkers, and families. My parents were over the moon. Mom had been talking about it nonstop, bragging about Lindsay's role in the presentation. Dad even bought a new suit to wear. They were so proud of her, so convinced that she was destined for greatness. I decided to go. I wasn't going to sit in the background this time. I wasn't going to let them pretend that everything was perfect. My kids and I arrived early, and we took our seats in the middle of the room. The auditorium was packed, with people milling about, chatting in hushed tones. Posters on the walls boasted the company's values, integrity, teamwork, excellence star. I couldn't help but feel a bitter laugh bubbling up inside me. Integrity? There was nothing about Lindsay that screamed integrity. When Lindsay stepped onto the stage, she was all smiles and polished confidence, just like she always was. But I could see the cracks. I saw her glance nervously at her team as she launched into the presentation. She was stumbling, trying to gloss over details she didn't understand. The room was quiet, waiting for her to say something meaningful. But she couldn't. She was too busy trying to charm them, too busy trying to prove she was the best. And then, it happened. A client, an older woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tone, raised her hand. "Can you explain the cost analysis breakdown you mentioned earlier?" she asked. Lindsay froze. She flipped through her papers, but she couldn't find the numbers. She stammered, trying to cover her tracks. The numbers aren't important right now. What matters is..." But the woman cut her off. "Numbers are the only thing that matters." I could feel the tension in the room. People were starting to notice. Lindsay laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. "Don't worry, I'll have my assistant send it later." But that was my cue. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I stood up, my voice calm and clear. "Maybe she doesn't have the numbers because she didn't do the work." The room went dead silent. All eyes turned to me. Lindsay's confident smile faltered, and she blinked, clearly caught off guard. I continued, my voice gaining strength. "She's been bragging about skipping meetings, passing off other people's work as her own, and flirting with her manager instead of preparing. You handed her this job, but this," I gestured to the stage where she stood, visibly trembling, "is what happens when you give someone pride they haven't earned." Gasps filled the room. People were talking in low murmurs, some of Lindsay's coworkers giving me knowing looks. I didn't need proof. The truth was right there in front of everyone. Lindsay opened her mouth, trying to defend herself, but her voice cracked. "She's lying," she stammered. "She's jealous." But the client who had asked the question shook her head, clearly unimpressed. "No, I believe her," she said. "This explains everything I've seen tonight." And just like that, it was over. The illusion shattered. Lindsay's facade crumbled before everyone's eyes. The manager stood up, looking furious. "Lindsay, step down." My parents, sitting in the front row, stood up in a frenzy. "You can't do this." Mom cried, her pearls clattering as she grabbed Dad's arm. "That's our daughter." But no one was listening to them anymore. The room had already made its judgment. The atmosphere in the auditorium was thick with anticipation, the kind of energy that buzzed in the air when something big was about to happen. The rows of seats were filled with employees, clients, and families. It was a showcase, a celebration of talent, and a chance for the company to flaunt its brightest stars. Lindsay, my younger sister, was one of those stars. I could hear my parents chattering excitedly in the front row, their voices filled with pride as they whispered about how amazing Lindsay was, how proud they were of her. They were gushing, making sure everyone within earshot knew how lucky they were to be part of her success. Lindsay was sitting in front, confidently flipping through her notes as if she were born to do this, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. She wore a crisp, tailored blazer, her hair perfectly styled, a smile plastered on her face that never quite reached her eyes. She had that practiced charm that could make anyone believe she was the smartest, the most capable person in the room, even if the truth was far from it. It was a mask, and everyone in the room seemed to buy it. I sat in the middle row, with my 2 kids beside me. I didn't know why I came to this event. Part of me wanted to be there to support her, but the larger part of me needed to be there to watch. To see how far she could go with the lies she had built around herself, to see if the world would continue to reward her for the facade she had so carefully crafted. As Lindsay took the stage, she was in full performance mode. Her voice rang out clear and confident, explaining things she had no real understanding of, barely skimming the surface of her material. I could see it. I could see how hard she was working to fake her way through it. She hesitated at points, glanced nervously at her team, then quickly moved on, hoping the audience wouldn't notice. But I did. I noticed every little misstep, every word she stumbled over, every time she tried to gloss over something she didn't actually understand. She was trying to charm everyone into believing she was competent. But I knew better. I knew the truth about her laziness, her lack of integrity, her tendency to cut corners. I had heard her bragging about skipping meetings, about lying her way through projects, and about getting by on her looks and connections instead of actual hard work. The thought of her standing there, pretending to be the expert, made my blood boil. Then came the moment that I had been waiting for. One of the clients, a sharp woman in her 50s, raised her hand, cutting through Lindsay's performance. Can you explain the cost analysis breakdown you mentioned earlier? The question hung in the air like a sword ready to drop. Lindsay froze. She flipped through her notes, her fingers trembling, searching desperately for the answer. But the numbers weren't there. She tried to smile and deflect, but the cracks in her facade were showing. The numbers aren't important right now, she said, her voice wavering. The client wasn't having it. Numbers are the only thing that matters, she replied, her voice firm. The room was still. I could see the tension spreading, and I could feel the weight of the moment. Lindsay smiled, but it was strained, her nerves getting the best of her. Don't worry, I'll have my assistant send it later, she said, trying to laugh it off. But the damage was done. People were starting to notice. I could see some of her coworkers exchanging looks, shaking their heads. They knew, just like I did, that she hadn't done the work. She hadn't prepared. She had skated by, as always. And then, as if on cue, I stood up. The silence in the room was deafening as I raised my voice. Maybe she doesn't have the numbers because she didn't do the work, I said, my words cutting through the air. Lindsay's head snapped toward me, her face going pale as she realized what was happening. I continued, my voice steady and calm, though my heart was racing. She's been bragging for weeks about skipping meetings, about copying other people's work, and about flirting with her manager instead of preparing. You handed her this job, but this, I gestured toward her frozen figure on the stage, is what happens when you give someone pride they haven't earned. The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. The looks that passed between the clients, her coworkers, and the audience were enough to tell me everything. They knew. They had always known. Lindsay's charm was never enough to cover up her incompetence. Lindsay tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked. She's lying. She's just jealous, she sputtered. But no one was listening. The woman who had asked the question spoke again, her tone resolute. No, I believe her, she said. This explains everything I've seen tonight. And then it happened. The manager, who had been sitting in the back, stood up. Lindsay, step down, he said, his voice firm and final. The crowd was murmuring now, some nodding in agreement, others looking at Lindsay with pity or disgust. The illusion had shattered. The perfect image she had built for herself was no more. She was exposed. I could see my parents, sitting in the front row, their faces turning red with anger and embarrassment. Mom jumped to her feet, her pearls clattering as she protested. You can't do this, she cried, reaching for Dad's arm. That's our daughter. But no one was listening to them anymore. They had lost their audience. They had lost their credibility. The whispers in the room grew louder as Lindsay was escorted off the stage, her head down, her posture slumped in defeat. The offer letter she had been handed just days before was now worthless in her trembling hands. It was done. The lie had been exposed. The truth had come out, and the consequences were undeniable. My parents tried to follow her, shouting at anyone who would listen, but it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done, and there was no going back. I bent down to Hannah and Michael, who were staring at me with wide eyes. They didn't fully understand what had just happened, but I knew that one day they would. I leaned in and whispered, "See? No matter how much someone laughs at you, the truth always makes them trip." We walked out of the auditorium, leaving the chaos behind us. Lindsay was sobbing in the hallway, her badge slipping from her blazer pocket as she tried to gather herself. As we made our way to the door, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that building hours ago. I had taken control. I had exposed the truth. And in doing so, I had stolen something far more important than a job, something my family could never get back, their pride.